In the grand ballrooms of Regency London, the moonlit gardens of France, the sun-kissed villas of Italy, and the passionate streets of Spain, love has always found a way. Here, we bring you original historical romance stories filled with passion, sacrifice, and unforgettable destinies. Before tonight's tale begins, don't forget to subscribe and join our growing community of romantics from around the world. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Now, settle in and let history whisper its most beautiful secrets. This is Tales of Whispering Hearts. There is a particular kind of suffering that has no name in polite society. It is the suffering of a man who knows exactly what he feels, knows precisely that he must not feel it, and finds himself feeling it more completely with every passing day regardless. It does not announce itself. It arrives quietly, the way winter arrives, not all at once, but in small, cold degrees, until one morning you look up and realize that everything has changed, and you cannot recall the exact moment it happened. This is the story of Sebastian Vane, the Duke of Mayfair. And it begins, as the most honest stories do, not with a grand declaration or a dramatic event, but with something very small. It begins with a book left on a chair. Sebastian Vane had been engaged to Miss Cecilia Hartwell for 4 months, when he first truly noticed her younger sister. He had met Clara Hartwell before, of course. She had been present at dinners and drawing-room visits, hovering at the edges of conversations with a quality of quiet attention that he had registered vaguely as shyness and not thought much about. She was 21 to Cecilia's 24. She was not, in the conventional assessment of the London season, the prettier sister. Cecilia was widely considered a great beauty, with golden hair and easy laughter, and the particular social grace of someone who has been raised from birth to be admired. Clara had dark eyes and a mouth that was usually serious, and a way of looking at things as though she were cataloguing them for some private purpose. Sebastian had barely spoken 20 words to her, until the afternoon in October, when he arrived for a visit at Hartwell House on Brook Street, was shown to the drawing-room and found it empty. The family was expected momentarily. He sat down in the chair nearest the window to wait. He sat on something. He retrieved it. A small, battered volume, the collected letters of Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, so thoroughly read that the spine had cracked clean in half and been repaired with a careful strip of cloth. Inside the front cover, in small, precise handwriting, C. Hartwell, her book, Do Not Take. He was smiling at this, at the fierce possessiveness of it, at the small declaration of ownership pressed into the front page of a 200-year-old correspondence, when Clara Hartwell appeared in the doorway. She stopped when she saw him. Then she saw what he was holding. Something moved across her face. Embarrassment, certainly, but underneath it, something more complicated. "Your Grace," she said, "I apologize. I left that. I didn't know you had arrived. The fault is mine," he said. He held the book out to her. "Lady Montagu, you read her letters." She crossed the room and took the book from him with the careful hands of someone reclaiming something precious. "I have read them 4 times, she said, and then seemed to catch herself, as though the admission was more than she'd intended to offer. 4 times, he repeated. She was extraordinary, Clara said, with a directness that was quite unlike the careful social register most young women used in the presence of a duke. She traveled when women were not supposed to travel. She had opinions about medicine and politics and literature, and she wrote them down and sent them out into the world without apology. I find her rather bracing." Sebastian looked at her. He had the peculiar sensation of a man who has walked past a painting in a corridor a dozen times, and suddenly, on the 13th pass, actually looked at it. "I have always thought so too," he said. Clara blinked, as if she had expected mild agreement at best, as if she had not expected him to mean it. "Cecilia says she finds Lady Montagu tiresome," Clara offered, and then appeared to immediately regret it. "You are very different from your sister," Sebastian said. The observation came out more simply than he intended. He saw the flicker of something across her face. Not offense, exactly. Something more careful than that. "Yes," she said, "we are." And then Cecilia swept in from the hallway with her mother behind her, all warmth and laughter and the effortless social radiance that Sebastian had found deeply appealing when he first met her. and the conversation was subsumed entirely, and Clara settled back into her corner with her repaired book, and Sebastian smiled at his fiancée and said all the correct things. But on the carriage ride home, he thought about the inscription, "Do not take." He thought about the way she had said bracing, with a small private satisfaction in the word, as though she were consulting an internal list and finding the right one. He told himself it meant nothing. He was wrong. The Hartwell family had come to London from Derbyshire 3 years prior, following the death of Sir George Hartwell, who had left his wife and 2 daughters, a respectable house, and a less respectable set of accounts. Lady Hartwell was a pragmatic woman of great social ambition and limited patience for sentiment. She had one objective for the season of 1815, to see Cecilia, her elder daughter, advantageously married. Cecilia had cooperated beautifully. She was charming and accomplished, and genuinely lovely, and she had attached the attention of Sebastian Vane, the Duke of Mayfair, within the first 3 weeks of the season. The engagement had been arranged by December. Lady Hartwell had considered it the crowning achievement of her life. Clara had been the quiet witness to all of this. She did not begrudge her sister the match. At least, she told herself she did not. Cecilia was kind to her in the easy, distracted way of someone who has always been the center of things and cannot quite imagine another person's experience of standing outside that center. She loved Clara, in her way. She simply did not often think to ask Clara what she thought about things. No one asked Clara what she thought about things. She thought about a great many things. She thought about whether the peace in Europe would hold, and whether Lord Castlereagh's negotiations were as successful as the newspapers claimed, and whether Lady Montague's account of the Turkish baths was as subversive as she suspected. She thought about the novel she was reading, and the one she wished someone would write, that no one had yet. She thought about the fact that she was 21 years old, and had never once been asked to dance first at a ball, always second, always after Cecilia had been engaged for the opening set, by whichever gentleman was most eager to distinguish himself. She did not think, in the beginning, about Sebastian Vane. That came later. That came in degrees, the way it always does. It came the second time they spoke properly, which was at a dinner at the Pemberton House in Grosvenor Square, where a rearrangement of the seating plan, caused by the late arrival of Lord Pemberton's gout-stricken uncle, placed Clara beside the Duke of Mayfair, instead of Cecilia, who was seated at the far end of the table beside their host. Clara sat down, saw who was beside her, and arranged her face into the pleasant neutrality she had spent years perfecting. Sebastian turned to her with the automatic social courtesy of a man who has attended 1,000 dinners. Then he recognized her, and something in his expression shifted in a way she couldn't quite read. "Miss Clara," he said, "we meet again without her ladyship to moderate us." She looked at him carefully. "I was not aware we required moderating." "Nor was I," he said, "and yet here we are, seated beside one another without our usual chaperones. It seems fate has decided we should attempt conversation." There was a dryness to it, a lightness she had not expected. She had formed the impression of him, from a careful distance, as formal, composed, ducal in his bearing, in a way that suggested not arrogance, but a long and thorough training in how to present a correct face to the world. She had not expected the dry humor. She recalibrated. "Then we had better attempt it successfully," she said. "What shall we talk about?" "What would you like to talk about?" he asked. It was, again, a simple question, but she noticed that it was a question, that he had asked what she wanted, not offered a topic of his own choosing for her to respond to. "Napoleon's exile," she said, after a brief pause. "I have been reading the accounts, and I find the newspapers rather more interested in the spectacle of it than the implications." Sebastian Vane looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "The implications for the German states, do you mean, or for the broader reconstruction of the Congress?" And they talked, genuinely talked, the way Clara rarely got to talk at dinners, where conversation was usually a performance rather than an exchange, for the better part of 2 hours. About the Congress of Vienna and its complexities, about what peace in Europe might actually mean, practically, for people who were not kings, about a history of the Napoleonic campaigns she had read and he had read, and they had each arrived at different conclusions about. He disagreed with her about Lord Wellington. She told him why she thought he was wrong. He considered this seriously, rather than simply moving past it the way men usually moved past disagreements from women, and said that she made a reasonable argument that he wanted to think about further. She had to look away from him, at that, toward the candles and the wine glasses and the noise of the other conversations around them, because something had happened in her chest that she didn't want visible on her face. He was kind, genuinely kind, not socially kind. There was a difference, and she had learned to tell it. She spent the carriage ride home reminding herself, very firmly, that he was engaged to her sister. She spent the following week reminding herself of the same thing. It became, gradually, a significant portion of her interior life. Sebastian, for his part, was conducting a parallel and equally uncomfortable education. He was a man who had been raised to do things correctly. The dukedom had come to him at 19, following the sudden death of his father, and he had spent the 12 years since in the disciplined construction of a reputation for honor and responsibility. He managed his estates well. He fulfilled his obligations to Parliament. He was kind to his tenants and fair in his dealings, and had been told, more than once, that he was one of the few men of his position who actually deserved it. The engagement to Cecilia Hartwell was correct in every possible sense. She was lovely and sociable, and would make an excellent duchess. He did not love her, not yet, not in the deep way he had always vaguely imagined it might be possible to love someone. But he respected her, and found her company pleasant, and assumed that warmth would come with time. Many excellent marriages had begun with considerably less. He had not anticipated Clara. He had not anticipated the dinner at the Pembertons, or the discovery that there was a person in the world who thought about the Congress of Vienna in essentially the same terms he did, and was willing to say so plainly and defend her position without apology. He had not anticipated the quality of her attention, the way she listened, which was different from the way most people listened, which was really just waiting for their turn to speak. Clara Hartwell actually listened. She stored what she heard and turned it over and came back with something new. He found himself thinking about what she would say about things. He would read something in the newspaper and form a thought, and then, almost immediately, form a second thought that was a version of what Clara would say in response, and it was nearly always more interesting than his first thought. He told himself this was a harmless intellectual appreciation, that it had nothing to do with the way she tucked her dark hair behind her ear when she was thinking, or the small private smile she had when she found a sentence in a book that particularly pleased her. He told himself this. He did not believe it. He began to pay attention to the times she was in the same room as him, which was more frequent than he had realized, because she had previously been so quiet that he had essentially not seen her. He began to notice the moments when she nearly said something and stopped herself. He began to wonder what the stopped things were. He made efforts, at Hartwell House, to draw her into conversations that Cecilia and Lady Hartwell dominated. He asked her opinions deliberately, in front of her family, watching the small surprise that crossed her face each time, as though she expected to be ignored and had to readjust to being addressed. He did not do it in a way that drew attention to itself. He was careful about that, but he was doing it, and he knew why. He stood at his study window on a grey November evening and admitted it to himself, with the flat honesty of a man who refuses to lie to himself, even when it would be more comfortable. He was falling in love with his fiancée's sister. The admission did not make him feel better. It made him feel worse, in the specific way that clarity makes things worse. You can no longer pretend you don't know what you know. He could not act on it. He would not act on it. Cecilia had done nothing wrong. The Hartwell family were depending on this match. His own honor was not something he was willing to discard for the sake of feeling. He had been raised, at some cost, to understand that what one felt and what one did were not the same thing and were not required to be. He would fulfill his obligation. He would marry Cecilia Hartwell in the spring, and he would be a good husband, and in time, perhaps, the thing that had opened in him toward Clara would close again, the way wounds did, imperfectly, but sufficiently. He believed this. He almost managed to go on believing it, until the evening of the Alderton Ball, when everything came apart. The Alderton Ball was the last great event of the winter season, held in the first week of December at Alderton House in Belgrave Square. The rooms were magnificent, 3 connected ballrooms, chandeliers of imported Venetian glass, an orchestra imported from Vienna for the occasion. London society arrived in its entirety, dressed in its very best, and the dancing began at 9 o'clock and was not expected to end before 3 in the morning. Sebastian arrived with Cecilia on his arm, as was correct. He danced with her for the first 2 sets, as was expected. He was attentive and pleasant, and said the right things to the right people, and was by any measure a model of correct behavior. He saw Clara come in with Lady Hartwell, a few minutes behind them. She was wearing dark green, not the pale colors fashionable for young women of her station, and he suspected from the slight set of her chin that there had been some argument about it before they left the house. She looked like herself, which is to say, she looked remarkable, and he made himself stop looking almost immediately. He did not dance with her. That would have drawn comment. But halfway through the evening, during the supper interval, he found himself near the library at the end of the east corridor, escaping briefly the noise of the ballroom, and heard her voice. She was not alone. She was speaking with a young man Sebastian vaguely recognized, a Mr. Alderton, some nephew of the house, who was leaning with studied carelessness against the doorframe of the library and saying something that made Clara's expression go carefully, politely blank. Sebastian couldn't hear the words, but he had spent months learning to read her face, and he recognized that expression, the one she wore when someone said something to her that she found either foolish or objectionable and had decided to absorb in silence rather than correct. He should have walked past. He didn't walk past. He stopped and said pleasantly, "Miss Clara, I hoped I might find you. My cousin was asking about the Montague letters. She believed you were the person to speak with." It was entirely invented. He had no cousin present and no conversation to reference. Clara looked at him. He saw in her dark eyes the recognition of what he'd done, the understanding that he had invented a reason to interrupt, to give her an exit. Mr. Alderton straightened and said something civil and excused himself, and then they were standing in the corridor alone, which was not something Sebastian had planned, and he was aware quite suddenly of how near she was, and how quiet the corridor was, and how entirely his own behavior had just departed from what he would describe as controlled. "There is no cousin," Clara said. "No," he agreed. She looked at him for a moment. Something passed across her face that was more unguarded than he had seen from her before, something that hurt him, in some complicated way to see. "You should go back to Cecilia," she said. "Yes," he said. Neither of them moved. "Sebastian," she said, and the use of his name, the first time she had used it, the only time, went through him like sound through water. "This is not, we cannot." She stopped, pressed her lips together in the way she did when she was choosing her words with great care. "I think you know what I am about to say." "I do," he said. "You are right, and I am going to go back into the ballroom and dance with your sister, and this conversation will not happen." "Yes," she said quietly. "But Clara," he stopped himself. He had no right to the rest of the sentence. She looked at him with her serious dark eyes and her carefully composed face, and he understood, in that moment, with absolute and devastating clarity, that she felt it too, that she had been carrying it, as he had been carrying it, in silence, alone, for months. It changed nothing. It made everything worse. "Good evening, Your Grace," she said, and she walked back toward the ballroom, and he stood in the corridor for a long moment, and then he straightened his coat and followed. The weeks that followed were the most difficult of Sebastian's life. He threw himself into the obligations of the dukedom with a focus that his secretary found impressive and his friends found slightly alarming. He reviewed his estate accounts. He attended every session of Parliament. He answered his correspondence with unusual promptness. He was, by every outward measure, a man in full command of himself. He visited Hartwell House twice a week, as was appropriate for a man engaged to be married in the spring. He was unfailingly pleasant to Cecilia. He was polite and careful with Clara, not cold but not warm, the correct calibrated distance of a man who is managing something. Clara was the same with him. They had arrived, without discussing it, at a kind of unspoken agreement, a mutual, silent decision to keep the distance and not look too directly at each other and let the months pass until the wedding made it impossible. He thought it was working. Then came the afternoon in February when he arrived at Hartwell House and found Clara alone. Lady Hartwell was ill. Cecilia had gone with a friend to a dressmaker's appointment and had not yet returned. The maid who showed him in was apologetic. She had expected Miss Cecilia back by now. She was sure it would be only another quarter of an hour. Sebastian said he would wait. He was shown to the drawing room. Clara was there, standing at the window with a letter in her hand, and she turned when she heard him, and he saw that her eyes were red. She had been crying. Not recently. She had composed herself, but recently enough that it was visible. He stopped. "Forgive me. I didn't know you were—" "I am perfectly well," she said, which was clearly untrue. He should have sat down and looked at the view and let the quarter of an hour pass in polite silence. He had been managing very well for 2 months. He had been disciplined and correct and honorable. He crossed the room. He stopped a few feet from her, which was as close as honor permitted. "What has happened?" She shook her head slightly. "It is nothing. A letter from a friend. Nothing of consequence." He waited. She pressed the letter between her palms. "She is getting married," Clara said at last. "My dearest friend from Derbyshire. She writes that she is very happy." A pause. "She is marrying a man she chose. A man who read the same books she did and argued with her about them and thought that was a reason to love her rather than a reason to be concerned." The silence stretched between them. "That is a rare thing," Sebastian said, very quietly. "Yes," Clara said. She looked at him then, not the careful, managed look she had given him for 2 months. The real look, the one from the corridor at the Alderton ball, the one that hurt. "I don't want." She stopped, started again. "I have spent my whole life being the quiet one, the sensible one, the one who does not cause trouble and does not want too much, and does not make anyone uncomfortable by having inconvenient feelings." She said this without self-pity, as a plain statement of fact, which made it worse. "I am very good at it." "I know," he said. "I don't want to be good at it anymore." Her voice was steady. "I am telling you this because I think we are past pretending, and because I am tired, and because I trust you. I am not asking for anything. I am not." She stopped again. "I know what is right. I know what you will do. I know what I will do. I just needed to say it to someone, and you are the only person in the world I would say it to." Sebastian stood very still. The room was quiet. The winter afternoon pressed grey against the window. Somewhere downstairs a door opened and closed, a servant moving through the house. He had built 31 years of honor on the principle that what was right and what he wanted were required to be the same thing. He had believed it without much effort, because they had generally been the same thing. He had never been tested. Not really. He was tested now. He looked at Clara Hartwell, this woman with her repaired books and her serious face, and her stopped sentences, and her mind that moved like water finding the shape of things, and he understood what he was about to do before he did it, and he understood that it would cost him. He said, "I need to speak with Cecilia." Clara went very still. "I am going to end the engagement," he said. I should have understood sooner what the right thing was. I told myself that fulfilling the obligation was honor. I was wrong. Marrying your sister knowing what I know would not be honor. It would be a very elaborate form of cowardice." "You cannot," Clara said. "The scandal." "There will be a scandal," he said. "I know that. I will conduct it in a way that directs as little of the damage toward your family as possible. I will be generous in what I say publicly. I will take the blame entirely. Cecilia will recover," he said. "She is a beautiful, accomplished young woman who will have other suitors within the month. I do not say that dismissively. I say it because it is true." He paused. "It is not Cecilia I am in love with." The words landed in the room like light. Clara looked at him for a long, still moment. "I am not asking you for anything," he said carefully. "I am not ending this engagement because I expect something in return. I am ending it because it is wrong, and it was wrong before you told me what you just told me, and I knew it was wrong, and I was afraid. I am less afraid now." She said nothing, but her eyes were very bright, and the letter was still pressed between her palms, and she was looking at him with an expression he had never seen from her before. He had seen her careful. He had seen her composed. He had seen her fighting to keep something off her face. He had not yet seen her hopeful. It changed everything about her face. It made her look younger and more vulnerable and absolutely radiant, and he made himself step back, because if he didn't step back immediately, he was going to do something that would make the next conversation with Cecilia considerably more complicated. "I am going to go," he said. "I will speak with Cecilia tomorrow, and then—" He stopped. "And then whatever happens next will happen honestly, which is all I can promise." He turned to go. "Sebastian," she said. He turned back. She had lowered the letter. She was looking at him with that new expression, careful, warm, braver than anything he had ever seen her. "Thank you," she said, "for not walking past." He looked at her for a long moment. "I could not have," he said. "I tried." And then he left. The conversation with Cecilia was the hardest thing Sebastian had done in a very long time. He was honest with her, as honest as honor permitted, which was to say he told her that he had come to understand that his feelings were not what a husband's feelings ought to be, and that he was releasing her from the engagement, and that the fault was entirely his own, a failure of understanding that he should have had sooner. He did not tell her about Clara. He would not say that. Not then, perhaps not ever, to Cecilia. Cecilia cried. She was genuinely hurt, not heartbroken in the way of a woman who has lost a great love, but wounded in the way of a woman whose plans have been disrupted, whose future has shifted unexpectedly beneath her feet. He understood the difference and was compassionate about both. Lady Hartwell's reaction was considerably louder. She was furious, understandably furious. He absorbed her anger with the steadiness of a man who knows he deserves it and refuses to flinch from it. He was generous in the terms of the broken engagement. He ensured that whatever statement was made publicly placed no blame on the Hartwell family, on Cecilia, on anything except his own change of heart. The scandal was, as he had predicted, significant. The drawing rooms of Mayfair discussed it for 3 weeks. Various verdicts were arrived at. Some sided with Cecilia. Some suspected some unnamed third party and were not entirely wrong. It died down, as these things always did, when something newer happened. He did not see Clara during this time. He wrote to her once, briefly, correctly, through Thomas Ashwood, whose sister was Clara's acquaintance, which gave him a legitimate channel. He said only that the engagement had been ended, that he hoped she was well, and that he would call at Hartwell House when she indicated that it was appropriate to do so. She wrote back 3 days later. The letter was short. It said, "May I suggest Thursday at 4 o'clock?" He was there at 5 minutes to 4. What happened next is the kind of thing that does not happen quickly in the England of 1815, where propriety required a period of visible caution, and the social world needed time to adjust its understanding of what was occurring before it could accept it. What happened was this. Sebastian Vane began calling at Hartwell House, not as Cecilia's fiancé, but as a gentleman who wished to know Miss Clara Hartwell better. He brought books. She argued with him about them. He called her opinions reckless. She told him his opinions were overcautious. They discovered they were both right, which is the most interesting kind of disagreement, the kind that ends not in one person winning, but in both people understanding something new. Lady Hartwell was, for some months, frigidly polite to him. Cecilia left London for Bath, and then for Derbyshire, and wrote her mother letters that suggested she was recovering with a speed that did not entirely surprise Sebastian, who had always privately suspected that Cecilia's attachment to him was rather more to the dukedom than to the man inside it. Clara never said anything unkind about her sister. When Sebastian once observed, carefully, that Cecilia seemed to be managing well, Clara said simply, "She is stronger than people give her credit for. She always has been, and she will find someone who suits her better." There was no bitterness in it. There was something more complicated than that. Love for her sister, and a kind of gentle faith in her, and a long history of watching from the edges that had given Clara a clearer view of the people around her than any of them usually realized. It was April when he asked her. They were walking in Green Park in the early morning, which had become a habit on certain days of the week, a time when the park was quiet and the day had not yet become complicated. Clara had her repaired Montague letters under her arm because she had been reading on the bench before he arrived. The trees were putting out new green leaves. London smelled of mud and blossoms. He stopped walking. She stopped a step later and turned to look at him. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you, I think, since you told me Lady Montague was bracing, and meant it with your whole heart. I would like to know if you will marry me. Not because it is correct, not because it is expected, because I cannot think of a single conversation I want to have for the rest of my life that I don't want to have with you." Clara stood in the April morning with the old Montague letters under her arm and looked at him for a long time. He had learned to wait through her silences. She thought before she spoke, which meant that when she spoke, she meant every word of it. "Yes," she said at last, "though I should warn you, I am a great deal of trouble." "I have noticed," he said, and he smiled the way he only smiled with her, the real one, the one that arrived without his planning it. "And I have opinions about things." "Extensively," he agreed. "And I will argue with you. I am depending on it." She looked at him with her dark eyes and her serious face, and that small private smile that he had first seen over a battered book on a chair, the one he had been trying to see more of ever since. "Then yes," she said, "with all of that." He took her hand. The park was quiet around them. The morning was cold and clear, and alive with the small sounds of the city waking up beyond the trees. He held her hand, and she did not take it back, and there was nothing more to say, so they started walking again, forward into the April morning, and everything that was waiting for them in it. They were married in June, when the roses were out, in a quiet church in Mayfair. The wedding was smaller than his engagement to Cecilia would have been, deliberately so, without the grand social spectacle he could have arranged. He did not want a spectacle. He wanted a Wednesday morning, and a church, and Clara, in a dark blue gown, looking at him with the expression he loved most on her face, the one that was unguarded, and warm, and entirely her own. Cecilia attended, because Clara had asked her to, and because Cecilia was braver than the world knew, and because by June she had met a sensible, good-natured landowner in Bath who thought she was wonderful, and said so frequently, and the wound was healed enough that she could sit in a church pew and wish her sister well and mean it. Lady Hartwell cried during the ceremony, which she would have denied vigorously. Sebastian's friends, who had spent 5 years trying to match him with various suitable women and watched him resist all of it with polite implacability, said that they could not quite explain it, but that he seemed different, lighter, as if something that had been held in careful check for a long time had been released and turned out to be, simply, joy. Clara continued to read Lady Montague. She began, in the 2nd year of their marriage, to write her own letters, long, meticulous, opinionated letters to friends and scholars, and occasionally to newspapers, under her name, about the things she thought mattered. Sebastian read every one of them before they were sent. He told her when they were wrong. She told him why he was mistaken. They were both usually right about half of it. She did not become a different person. She did not become louder, or more socially adept, or less difficult. She remained precisely herself, serious and warm and full of stopped sentences that she eventually, in time, began to let out. And he loved every version of her, as he had always suspected he would. Not the polished version that society required, not the version that knew how to be invisible in a ballroom, but the true and complete and complicated and extraordinary version. The one who left books on chairs, the one who used the word bracing with her whole heart, the one who had spent 21 years being the quiet one, and was only now, incrementally, deciding that she did not have to be. He thought, sometimes, about the book on the chair, about the inscription pressed into the front page, her book, "Do not take." He had not taken it. He had simply, slowly, in the way that matters, been trusted with it. He thought that was perhaps the best thing that had ever happened to him. And so ends tonight's tale. The Duke of Mayfair fell in love with his fiancée's sister. A story of a man who had spent his whole life doing the right thing until the right thing required more courage than all the correct things put together. A story of a woman who had spent her whole life being quiet, who loved a man she believed she could not have, and who found out what happens when someone decides to see you, really see you, and stays. A story about the difference between honor and courage, because sometimes they are the same thing, and sometimes, when you look at them closely, you discover they are pointing in opposite directions, and you must choose. And now, our question for tonight, the one we want you to answer in the comments below. If you were Clara, if you were the quiet one, the one always standing at the edge of the room, and someone finally saw you, truly saw you, what would you do? Would you say it first? Or would you wait? Would you send that letter? Would you walk into the morning and say yes? Tell us in the comments. Tell us what you would do if it were you in that story. We read every single one, and we love hearing from you more than you know. If tonight's story moved you, please give this video a like and subscribe to Tales of Whispering Hearts so you never miss a new tale. Share this with someone who believes in love, someone who has been quiet too long and deserves to know that someone, somewhere, is paying attention. Until next time, may you be seen, may you be known, and may love always find its way to you. This has been Tales of Whispering Hearts.